On today's episode of Beyond the Build, we're going to swap the stock PCM with the HP Tuners PCM, remove the supercharger, remove the exhaust, remove the stock drive shaft, pin the crankshaft, install the ATI dampener pulley, and replace the headers with American Racing long tube headers.
Me and Mike worked on the car all day. He's a super help to have, right there working side by side. He's really knowledgeable on cars in general. So it takes him very little direction. He just knows what to do. So that's a huge help on my part.
So far, working with Brenton's been awesome. He really knows what he's doing, especially on these platforms, but he's like very educational when he talks to you about it, and he kind of like walks you through every step, and it's been a really good experience so far.
Before we even took anything apart on the car, what we did is we changed out the PCM to the one that HP Tuners provided us that is already unlocked. The security cable also provided by HP Tuners was already installed in the car by Mike. So I wanted to go ahead and install the computer and just make sure everything works properly. Go ahead and start the car with the new computer before we take anything apart. The last thing I want to do is run into the end of the build and have a problem and not know, is it the computer, is it something else? So it just makes more sense to do it that way. So new PCM works flawlessly. At this moment, we're going to, we basically had the supercharger about ready to pull. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and get the coil packs off and get the plugs out, and that's gonna give us better access to start doing the headers. So we're gonna go in that order. There's a couple specialty tools that won't be here till tomorrow, so we're just kind of going along whatever the most efficient manner is. So if we had the blower off, we have more access up top to get the spark plugs and the top of the header bolts. So we're just kind of going in that order.
All right, so what we're up to is taking out all the factory spark plugs and replacing them with the new ones.
That'll be a good side-by-side comparison.
Never skip leg day.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so we're wrapped up on day number one. What we did is we removed the supercharger, changed out the spark plugs. We almost have the exhaust manifolds off. The rest of the exhaust is already pulled off. We've removed the stock drive shaft, and I think we're at a pretty good stopping point. So tomorrow we got a few things coming in UPS, and we're gonna get started on tomorrow.
Okay guys, it's Tuesday morning. Yesterday we got a pretty good start. We only started about noon yesterday when we actually got rolling on the car. Still made a ton of good headway today. We should get all the headers done. Hopefully we'll get to the rear end, get the crank pinned, and a lot to do, but should all be pretty manageable.
to be our Kenny Bell dual booster pump unit with a direct plug and play harness that they were nice enough to send us. It's a catch can setup.
Oh yeah.
And we've just already pre-made one for one of these cars. That way this is just a little bit easier. So what we're doing is we're clearancing the timing cover and AC bracket to accommodate for the larger crank pulley. We mounted this fixture up in here, and what we're doing is we're just pinning the crankshaft, which means we're basically drilling a hole between the crank balancer and the crankshaft itself and putting a pin in there. That way it can't slip on the crankshaft. We just finished pinning the crankshaft with the crank pin kit that Whipple provided for us. Very easy to use kit, very self-explanatory, I highly recommend it. So what we're getting ready to do now is install the ATI overdrive dampener pulley. So this is what the stock pulley looks like. And as you can see, there's no keyway inside of here. Okay, so that's the major issue. They relied on the crank bolt being able to keep this pulley tight enough basically to keep from spinning on the crankshaft, and that's where we've seen failures. So this is a really good modification to do to pin the crankshaft, and that's why we do this as part of stage 2. So what we go with is ATI's crank pulley, and you can see that it is much bigger in diameter. Okay, and what that does effectively is spin the blower faster and give us increased boost. So the ATI unit is made up of 3 different pieces. So the hub is already pressed on, and that's what we actually pin to the crankshaft. This first ring is for the supercharger, and this gets bolted on. And then the smaller pulley for the accessories is part of the stock unit right here. We bolt this on. Obviously this is a stock exhaust manifold, which is not bad. That's pretty good for a stock exhaust manifold, honestly. But as you can see, it's nothing compared to a long tube header. I'll flip this around when you all get shots of it. So this is where it mates up to the cylinder head. So you can see the size of these tubes compared to, let me flip this around. So you can see why obviously this would breathe much more efficiently than this would. Plus the added runner length is great for low end torque. So the headers are slotted in the bottom bolts. So I find it way easier to go ahead and get the bottom bolts started. I do maybe like 10 turns in or something. And then go ahead, the gasket's in place. So then we can go ahead and slip the header up in there, hanging off the bottom bolts, and the header's already in place. So I feel like we're at a really good spot on the car for being at the end of day 2. Tomorrow, what we'll probably do is go ahead and finish bolting up the headers. We got the wrong belt, little mishap, so the new belt will be coming tomorrow. It's way easier to just route the supercharger and the accessory belt with the radiator and everything out. So we're just gonna, when the belt comes in, we'll do that and put the radiator and everything back on the front of the car. And at that point, the engine compartment is gonna be almost done. We'll put the ignition coils back on and then the blower. So when we get to the blower, we're gonna take that and show you all the difference. We're gonna do break down the stock blower, put the internals in the new blower, and show you all up close exactly the differences inside of a stock blower versus the modified and why we do that. Past that, we'll really be very far on the car. At that point, it'll be time to tackle the rear cradle, and we'll go over that in detail at that time.